The last watch at Outpost Grey. The outpost was never meant to last. It was built quickly, quietly, and without ceremony, placed on a stretch of land that barely appeared on official maps. There was no nearby town, no recognizable landmark, and no obvious reason for anyone to pass through the area unless they already knew the outpost was there. Outpost Grey existed for one purpose only: to watch. No one ever explained exactly what they were watching for. The orders were always the same and they were always short. Maintain the perimeter. Log all movement. Report anything unusual. Stay alert. Stay quiet. Do not improvise. Do not take unnecessary risks. The men assigned to Outpost Grey learned early that questions were not encouraged. The fewer questions asked, the smoother the days seemed to go. 6 men rotated through the outpost at any given time. Not a full unit. Not a real platoon. Not enough to hold ground in a serious fight. Just enough to keep the lights on, keep the sensors running, and keep a pair of eyes on a road that most people did not even know existed. The outpost itself was little more than a cluster of reinforced structures surrounded by fencing, sensors, and floodlights. Sandbags were stacked where the wind hit hardest. Plywood walls had been replaced so many times they carried layers of different paint, each layer marking a previous repair. A tall antenna stood near the comms room, and the generator ran day and night, filling the air with a constant low hum that eventually blended into the background of everything. The watchtower stood slightly apart from the rest of the compound. It was tall enough to see miles in every direction but not tall enough to feel safe. Built from reinforced steel and weathered wood, it swayed slightly in strong winds. That gentle sway was a reminder that nothing built out here was permanent. Not the tower. Not the outpost. Not the men inside it. During the day, the land around Outpost Grey looked harmless. Flat ground stretching toward distant hills. A dirt road cutting through the landscape and disappearing into nothing. Wind moving dust across the open space. Sometimes a bird in the distance. Sometimes nothing at all. At night, the same land felt completely different. Darkness changed distance. It changed sound. It changed the mind. The horizon looked closer than it should have been. Shadows seemed to settle into shapes that disappeared as soon as you stared at them. Even familiar landmarks felt unfamiliar under the stars. Sergeant Thomas Hale had been assigned to Outpost Grey longer than most. He wasn't the oldest man there, but he carried himself like someone who had been tired for a long time. His movements were measured. His voice calm. His expression steady. He believed deeply in routine not because he loved it, but because routine gave structure to places that otherwise felt meaningless. Hale had stood watch in many places over the years. Cities, checkpoints, temporary camps, mountain ridges, dusty streets. Outpost Grey was not the most dangerous place he had ever seen, but it was one of the quietest. It was quiet in a way that made the mind work harder than it should, as if silence itself demanded attention. He kept a small notebook in the pocket of his jacket. Official logs were handled by the radio operator, but the notebook was his. A habit he had developed years earlier. Writing helped him notice patterns. It helped him separate what he saw from what he assumed. It helped him remember details that might matter later, even if no one asked. On his last rotation, the air felt heavier than usual. It wasn't fear at first. It was something more subtle. A sense that the silence had changed. That it had become deliberate, as if the land itself was listening instead of merely existing. On the first evening, Hale climbed the ladder to the watchtower just before sunset. His boots hit the metal rungs with a familiar rhythm. He carried his rifle out of habit more than expectation. From the tower, he scanned the horizon slowly the way he always did. Left to right. Pause. Right to left. Pause again. He noted the position of the hills, the road, the fence line, and the empty terrain beyond. Below him, the outpost moved through its routine. One man checked the generator. Another cleaned equipment that didn't really need cleaning. Someone heated food that would taste the same as it always did. A short laugh escaped from the mess area, then stopped as if even humor felt out of place out here. The sun sank lower, and the sky became a dull mix of orange and gray. No movement. No vehicles. No distant lights. The radio crackled softly, then settled into silence. Hale wrote the time in his notebook and kept watching. Minutes passed. Then hours. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of dust and fuel. Stars appeared one by one. A cold moon rose slowly and sat above the hills like a watchful eye. That was when Hale noticed the light. At first he assumed it was a reflection. A trick of the eyes after hours of staring into the dark. He blinked and focused again, expecting it to disappear. It did not. A single point of light near the far edge of the visible terrain. Not bright. Not flashing. just steady and fixed. Hale raised his binoculars and steadied his breathing. The light did not move. It did not grow stronger or weaker. It simply existed as if it had been placed there carefully and left alone. He checked landmarks and angles, confirming its position relative to the hills and the dirt road. Nothing he recognized matched that location. It did not line up with any known structure. It did not match any reflection from the outpost floodlights. It sat too far out, too clean, too calm. He reported it over the radio. The response came quickly, calm and procedural. Acknowledge, log, monitor and report any changes. That was all. That was how everything was handled at Outpost Grey. If something didn't attack you, it was treated as information, not danger. Hale watched the light for a long time. Long enough to convince himself it was nothing. A distant structure. A forgotten marker. A piece of equipment left behind. Something ordinary that simply hadn't been noticed before. Still, he wrote about it in his notebook. He described its position and brightness. He wrote down the time it appeared. He wrote down how long it stayed. Just before midnight, the light went out. Not gradually. Not like a bulb fading. It vanished instantly, leaving the darkness deeper than before. Hale stared at the empty place where it had been, waiting for it to return. It did not. He reported the change. Another acknowledgement. No further instructions. The rest of the night passed quietly, but sleep did not come easily when his shift ended. Hale lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the generator hum and the soft movement of men trying not to wake each other. He tried to tell himself it was just another quiet night, but his mind kept returning to the way the light disappeared. It felt less like something turning off and more like something choosing not to be seen. The next day was ordinary. That was part of what made the nights worse. They checked fuel. They checked water. They inspected sensors. They cleaned weapons. They ate the same meals. They joked about small things. The radio operator ran his scheduled checks. The sun moved across the sky as if nothing had happened. But Hale noticed changes anyway. He noticed that men looked up at the horizon more often. He noticed that conversations ended faster when the wind rose. He noticed that no one lingered alone outside the buildings after sunset. That evening the light returned. Same place. Same steady glow. Same silence. Hale reported it quickly this time. The radio operator logged it. There was a pause. Then the operator asked a question that surprised Hale. Was it there last night too? Hale hesitated before answering. Yes. The line stayed quiet longer than usual. That pause was small, but it carried weight. It was the sound of someone thinking instead of simply recording. Copy, came the reply. Keep eyes on it. That instruction stayed with Hale longer than it should have. It was the first time anyone had suggested the light mattered. Hale stayed in the tower longer than his shift required. He watched the light until his eyes ached. It did not move. It did not blink. It simply stayed, like a distant star that had chosen the wrong place to exist. When he finally climbed down, the light remained. He tried to sleep again. He slept in short segments, waking often. Each time he woke, he listened for something outside, then reminded himself that fear does not make a sound. Silence does. On the third evening, the light appeared earlier. Before sunset. Hale was already in the tower when it emerged, faint but unmistakable. He watched it closely, comparing its position to his notes. It was closer. Not by much. Not in a way that would alarm someone who wasn't paying attention. But Hale was paying attention. He had written down where it had been. He knew the angles. He knew the landmarks. And he knew it was closer. He reported the change. This time the response was immediate and sharper than before. Confirm movement. Hale checked again. The light did not move. It simply existed in a new position. Negative movement, he said. Position changed. There was another pause. Understood, came the reply. Maintain observation. That night the outpost felt smaller than it had before. Not physically smaller, but emotionally. The fence line seemed thinner. The open land beyond seemed closer. Hale noticed that the floodlights cast hard shadows on the ground, and those shadows made the space between buildings feel like something you could fall into. After his shift ended, Hale climbed down and walked slowly along the inner perimeter, checking the fence and sensors as if routine could force the world back into normal shape. He looked for tracks. He looked for damage. He looked for anything that would explain why a light would move closer without moving. He found nothing. Near midnight, Hale heard footsteps near the base of the tower. Slow steps. Deliberate. Just outside the reach of the floodlights. He froze. He listened. The steps continued, then stopped. Hale leaned over the tower railing and called out. No response. He took his flashlight and swept the area below. Nothing. No movement. No figure. No shadow that made sense. But the feeling remained. The feeling that something had been there, and that it had walked away the moment he tried to see it. On the fourth evening, the lights split into two. They appeared side by side, identical in brightness and distance. Hale felt his throat tighten as he watched them. 2 points of steady glow in a place that should have had none. He reported it, and for the first time the response did not sound calm. It was controlled but faster. Shorter. Copy. Stand by. Hale stood by. The radio remained silent for several minutes. Hale watched the two lights without blinking, afraid that if he looked away for even a moment, something worse would happen. Finally, the message came. Outpost Grey, prepare for shutdown. Hale didn't answer right away. Not because he couldn't. Because the words didn't fit. Outpost Grey had existed for years. It was boring. It was quiet. It was routine. Outposts like this were not shut down without planning, without reason, without weeks of notice. And yet the order was clear. Confirm, Hale said. The reply was short. Confirmed. Pack essential equipment. Relocate within 48 hours. No further guidance at this time. No explanation. Hale stared out at the lights again. They were still there. He felt something that surprised him. Relief. Not because he was happy. Because leaving was better than staying. Leaving meant the silence would belong to someone else. Leaving meant he could stop staring at the horizon, wondering what was staring back. The men at Outpost Grey packed without complaint. That was another thing Hale noticed. No one argued. No one asked why. Everyone moved quickly, quietly, as if they feared that if they stayed too long the order might change. The radio operator secured equipment. The mechanic prepared the vehicles. The medic packed supplies. The youngest soldier checked the perimeter twice, not because he had to, but because he needed to do something. Hale climbed the tower one last time before sunrise. The air was cold. The sky pale. The horizon empty. The two lights were gone. For a moment, Hale wondered if they had been a shared hallucination. A trick of tired eyes. A coincidence repeated enough times to become meaning. But then he turned toward the base of the tower and saw the footprints. They circled the tower. Not hurried. Not scattered. Placed carefully, evenly spaced, as if someone had walked around the structure slowly, examining it from every angle. Hale crouched and studied them. The prints were deep enough to be real. The soil held their shape. They were not old. They were not weathered. They did not lead away. They simply stopped. That detail mattered more than the prints themselves. Footprints that lead away can be explained. Someone walked then left. But footprints that circle and stop suggest something else. Suggest someone stood there longer than a passing glance. Suggest attention. Hale stared at them until the cold sank into his knees. He imagined a figure in the dark, walking around the tower while he stood inside it. A figure careful enough to remain just beyond the floodlights. A figure patient enough to wait until Hale's head turned the other way. He stood up slowly, as if moving too fast might break something. He did not report the footprints. Some things he understood were not meant to be logged. Some information did not help. Some information only made the silence heavier. Outpost Grey was dismantled 2 days later. The tower was taken down. The ground was cleared. The fence line was removed. The floodlights were packed away. The generator was shut off for the last time, and the sudden absence of its hum felt like the end of a heartbeat. The vehicles rolled out along the dirt road, leaving tracks that the wind would erase within days. Hale looked back once, watching the outpost shrink behind him. For a moment, it looked like nothing more than a few dark shapes on the land. Then it was gone. Later, Hale learned that Outpost Grey was removed from updated maps. Coordinates changed. Labels disappeared. Official references became vague, then stopped entirely. It was as if the outpost had never existed. Years passed. Hale moved on to other assignments. Other places. Other routines. But Outpost Grey stayed with him in a way he could not explain. Sometimes, in quiet rooms far from the desert, he would wake in the middle of the night remembering the light. Not how it looked, but how it felt. Like something watching back. He tried to describe that feeling once to a friend. The friend laughed and said fatigue plays tricks. Hale nodded because it was easier than arguing. But he knew fatigue does not leave footprints that stop. He stopped checking maps. He stopped asking questions. He learned that the military had a way of storing uncomfortable things in places no one looks. Then one night years later, Hale saw something on a news broadcast. A segment about satellite images, about how modern cameras can capture the smallest details from above. The reporter showed a set of night images of remote land. The kind of land no one watches. Hale stared at the screen, feeling his stomach tighten. For a brief moment, on the image, a single point of light appeared. A steady glow on empty terrain. Then it disappeared. The reporter laughed and called it a glitch. A reflection. A sensor error. Something that did not matter. Hale turned off the television and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the quiet. He realized then that Outpost Grey had not been watching the land. Outpost Grey had been there so the land could watch them. And when the watching became too obvious, the outpost was erased. Shut down. Removed. Forgotten. Not because it was unimportant, but because someone decided it was safer not to know. A Warbound journal story.